Howdy there. So I'm not great at this tutorial stuff, but I decided that a lot of people ask about the way that I go about mixing specific things. They're like, how do you get it punchy? How do you get the bass working with the kick like that? Blah, 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 so and so. So with this new track that I just recently released, I'm going to just show a couple secrets. There's no main subject here, though I will kind of emphasize on a few things, and I'm going to start with the drums and how they work in the mix. So I'm going to actually mute all of this. These are the vocals. I'm going to mute them so you can only hear the track. So let's just go ahead and listen to this real quick. Okay, so obviously you got kind of this pretty big drum thing going on. It's pretty punchy, it's pretty massive. And then you've got a pretty strong subby kind of bass under it. So I'm just going to start with the drums here. I'll just go ahead and isolate all of the drum and percussions. Right, so the first thing that I would suggest in these cases, it's not always this way, especially if you're, recording a rock track, you pretty much just want the drums as they are, unless you're getting experimental, which I'm always okay with. But in most cases with stuff like that, you don't want to, get too complex with it. In this case, though, this is a much more electronic sounding song, and that's a lot of what I do. And a big thing for me is stacking, pretty much just layering tons of different drum sounds on each other. And in this case, I actually pretty much, I did process them, I changed them around according to how I wanted them, but I pretty much used entirely Logic samples here. They're pretty darn good. I'll start with the snare here. Get the kick out of there, get these cymbals out of here. So pretty much now all that we have is this. Right, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is 5 different, now not necessarily snares, but things that are, at least complementing the snare a ton. So that's literally 5 tracks right there, all dedicated to pretty much the snare section, if you will. Now there is a snare roll that I programmed in here. Sounds a lot better with it. You definitely can kind of hear the MIDI sound when you isolate it. But in this case, just talking about the main snare, pretty much what I really like to do is have something that is bright, that kind of really pierces through the mix, and then something that's a bit lower to help kind of give it that punchiness. That's not always, but something that I do a lot, and in this case I did. So right here you've got, now I didn't name any of these. Usually if you want to be organized and a great person, unlike I am, you would probably want to name these specific things. So this is my low snare right here, right? And that's pretty much the Logic sample as it is. I've done very little to it in regards to actually changing the sample sound. So that's my low snare. Now, I want to show you a few things here. With the low snare stuff, if it doesn't, you can make something sound lower than it initially sounds. So in this case, this, without the EQ, I'm going to turn off the EQ. Without the EQ, this does not sound as fat or punchy or low. Hear that? That's a lot brighter. Now, if I turn this on, see, now we've got a little bit more of that low end, right? And what I do here is I very often turn on the analyzer because it's useful to see exactly which frequencies the sample is popping out the most in. In this regard, without any of that, obviously that frequency, that, that waveform wouldn't be going up so high, but I do have the frequency at roughly, says here 270 hertz. So, some snares are lower. Some you may want, up here. Probably not with that one. You probably want to use this little thing. Probably some are better in the 100 area. Sometimes you don't want a low end snare. There are a lot of points where you definitely want a brighter snare. It all depends on the song. It really does. It depends on the song. It depends on what you're looking for. Because ultimately, while I'm giving you these little tips on what I do, it comes down to what sounds the best. And eventually, over time, you just train an ear for what you're looking for what you're, trying to achieve. The other things, I pretty much always put EQ on the snare. I can hardly think of any time where I haven't. The other thing that I don't even think there's ever been a time I haven't, is putting a compressor on the snare. Now, I'm sure there's exceptions to every rule with this stuff, because once again, it really is up to what you're doing. But especially in this case, because I needed something very aggressive, I used the compressor to really make the snare pop. In this regard, there's actually a large set of just actually really, really nicely put together presets within Logic's compressor, not even a third-party compressor. So I'm pretty much only going to be using examples of things built into Logic, so that may help you out a bit. So in this regard, VCA snare is actually a fantastic... VCAs overall, studio, classic, vintage, they're all very good for drums. Now, usually when I pick a preset, in fact, there's never really a time that I keep it as it is. You usually want to mess with it because a preset is not going to work for every track the same. So in this regard, I think the preset usually puts it at like a threshold of negative 10 decibels. I put it at 20. It gives it a little bit, it sounds a bit more aggressive, pops more. Same with the ratio. I turned up the ratio to 5-1. Attack and release, I think I kept pretty much the same. Having the makeup be a little bit higher can give it more aggressiveness and make it louder. Also, having this not only makes it pop out more, but it does make it a much louder track, so you don't have to have it turned up so loud. Other things to add is when I start mixing, I always put a limiter. It does say compressor, but I do put a limiter on the master track to get it to a fairly loud point. I'll turn it down like negative 3 decibels or something so that there's headroom for mastering. But I do that because, now this is probably for another tutorial, but I do that because if I can get it as loud as possible, mastering engineers won't have to. Now, some people don't like this, but I don't really care. Mastering engineers won't be trying to get the track up to such ridiculous levels that they end up squashing the drums. I absolutely cannot stand that. The drums need to pierce through the mix for most songs for me. Aggressive songs, most specifically. So again, in that regard, you have to, if you're going to do that, which I do it because I think it is a better idea. And that's what I was taught. If you are going to put a limiter on the master track, do it first thing before you really start mixing the track. Secondly, it does, mixing around the limiter changes things up a bit. So these loud compressors, these loud compression stuff on the snares and stuff, you don't want it too loud or else the drums will start being squashed. So if you feel like it's being squashed, tone it down. If it's too quiet compared to the rest of the mix, maybe turn the entire rest of the mix down. Or maybe lighten on the compressor. You might be pushing it too hard. In this regard, I really don't see, look, the threshold is at most going to negative 4.5 decibels, and it's at a ratio of 1-to-1. So And, you know, look, attack, release, it's very soft, very soft. And I pretty much personally always use Platinum Digital for the limiter on the master track, just because it's a lot cleaner. I still will give it a little bit of dirt. I'll turn up the input gain a bit to get it a little bit more gritty. But I generally keep it at Platinum Digital, with a few exceptions, simply because other compressors like your FET compressors and stuff are going to distort it a little bit. Anyway, all that said, I can get more into the limiting stuff in another video. So there's your low end snare. Pretty much I apply that same compressor crap to other, you know, depending on how the specific sample sounds, I will adjust the compressor. In this regard, this is pretty much a clap. It's kind of, yeah, it's pretty much playing at the same time as the low end. So it's almost being serving as a high snare, if you will, a high end snare. So I once again, another thing is try not to exaggerate the same frequencies on every track. This goes generally. That's not a absolute, like, that's more of a guideline, but it can be broken at any point, because frequencies will kind of clash no matter what. Pretty much the idea is EQ should help to pop out frequencies, not make it fight with something else. So in this regard, it's a high, let's just say snare. It really is like a clap of sorts. And so pretty much I turned up, I didn't even get anywhere with this. Like, I could have gotten really specific over here, but I didn't want it getting too bright. I pretty much just turned, now you'll see with the analyzer here, see, it's already got a lot of stuff going on over here without me even touching the EQ. So why bother? And then see over here, I took out pretty much all of the low end. There's still a little bit of low, you know, between like 200 to 2000. If you want to say 2000 is more mid-tone, 500 is kind of mid-low. So, you know, that's working. So it kind of has its place. Then next, yeah, this is pretty much a legit clap sample. So this is where things get interesting. In a non-mixing way, this is something that I would definitely advise people to do. Never have perfect drums. Never have perfect anything for that matter. Things can sound electronic. Things can sound perfectly on time, but never have it all perfectly in line with each other. I think it adds a lot more character. It makes it sound a lot more natural. And in a lot of ways, like in this regard, it actually can very much help something sound more punchy, funkier. This whole thing, you know, recently with people trying to get things to be exactly perfect, you know, with MIDI and everything, oftentimes takes out the realism, the flow, the punchiness. So in this regard, I did say these were playing at the same time, but technically they are not. What I actually use a ton of is this little thing over here, just this delay thing right here. In this regard, I put it at negative 1/92nd, or I put it at negative 20. And it gives you, negative 20 ticks. So, you know, minus 9 milliseconds pretty much. So this is playing 9 milliseconds before the low snare. You might be able to hear just a slight bit that it's playing ever so slightly ahead of the low. Yeah. That helps kind of make it pierce through. And then with this guy, this one is being delayed way before. Now I don't know how many milliseconds. Let's see. It says, yeah. So almost 27 milliseconds before the low snare. And you can hear that one a little bit more. Yeah. That one is definitely playing before the other two. This one probably also, just like this one, they all have this snare thing going on just to make it pop. Again, you have to be careful. Don't let everything be so loud that the limiter is then trying so hard to force everything back that it all sounds squashed. Don't let that happen. You don't want your song sounding way too compressed like that. It's not a good sign. And when I do hear it in songs, it drives me absolutely bananas. So yeah, you've got that. Now, another thing that I like to do with a lot of these is I'll use the spreader, which is a modulation. You'll find it in the modulation category down here. And what it does is literally what it sounds like it does. It just spreads out the thing. Now, especially with actual melodic instruments, you will definitely hear the modulation. You will definitely hear it it'll kind of start getting almost out of tune the higher you turn up the intensity. But in this regard, because it's a drum, it doesn't really matter. So I turn it up to 100, make the channel delay pretty slow, and the rate is kind of halfway, and you get kind of this. Now, if I were to isolate this and then turn on and off the spreader, you can hear, right? So that's with the spreader. That's without it. That's with it. This is without it. See? There you go. So that said, that's pretty much, that helps give a little bit of stereo to a layered snare situation. You don't want it all mono. It can, then they all start fighting with each other. Truly though, and I'll get to that in a bit, but they all do have some stuff to give them more of a stereo flavor. I'm saying stereo instead of stereo. I'm really great at this. Next is, now this is from the same kit, Crate Digger, which I quite a bit enjoy, clearly. So this is another clap. And this one is even, look how much further I put this one. So this one is it's 33.5 milliseconds before the low snare. So it's, now you hear that, it's really coming before the snare, and that adds a little bit of almost realism, if you will. It definitely adds punchiness, because now you've got the sharp higher end hitting right before the low end. So you get both, really, is how that ends up. So the low end snare does not get hidden under the mix, and the high end stuff gets its quick moment, and it really does make a huge difference. Just try it with anything. If I were to tell you where I first kind of noticed this, people do it a lot in electronic music, but originally I noticed this in disco music. Disco music back in the 70s and 80s, they would constantly have actual recorded claps on their tracks, and the claps would almost always be ahead. The drums would almost always be behind the claps. And it added a lot of you could hear the snare almost snapping because of it, because now you've got this sharp high end thing coming right before it. So all of that said, I would definitely mess with that. Again, that does not work for rock music. This does not work for rock music. You've got to get your snare really piercing through with rock music, because with rock music, it generally is one kit. There's nothing being added onto it, at least not at the core. So all of that, and then the last one here is my trap door. It's pretty much a trap. As the name implies, it's pretty much a trap drum kit. But in this case, this one is kind of the one that's giving me my lower clap sound. And it's got a lot of reverb on it, the most reverb of any of them. Now, if you look at this, again, compressor also has the snare thing. It's a little bit lighter though, if you can notice. And you can kind of hear it too. It's not as harsh. I take out these low ends, but kind of turn up actually somewhat the same area as the low end. So this is kind of the clap that's almost in a way it really is. It's the low end clap. So I've got what is that? 3-4 claps there, and they're all doing something different. They're all kind of in a different frequency. So I've got kind of the midtones, about, looks like right here, 2900 hertz. And, at the top here, 680 hertz really turned up here. So that's pretty much that. Again, remember having, especially in this case, just talking about the claps, having them all in their own little space can help a lot. So this one isn't, the top isn't at 500. It's a little bit, it's more like, right here, 385 is its top. This one is more in the 1000 range, right? So they all do kind of meet the same frequencies at some point, but the top frequency where they're peaking probably the most is not the same. So all of that said, next thing I want to real quick talk about is adding just a little bit of stereo to the mix, to your snare. If your snare is pretty dead centered, that's fine. Especially the main snare should be fairly dead center. You don't really want to mess with that too much. It should be pretty much front and center. Everything else can kind of widen it, anything else you layer on top of it. But in this case, I still nevertheless put some stereo, a very simple one at that here. So in this case, I have an auxiliary on it. To bus one, bus one is going to my first auxiliary, which is just kind of a very small reverb. And so pretty much it just adds a little bit of stereo. Now, if you hear that, there's a little bit of a room, just makes it a little bit more wet. There's a little bit more of a room reverb on it. Now, if I take it out, you might be able to notice it. See, now it's very much in the center, very, very dry. Yeah, with it. See, it just adds a little bit. And then same pretty much goes for this one. I turned up the room reverb on this one even more. I've also got some other stuff going on here. I've got some longer. Now this one actually shares, this one has a reverb. It's got three pretty much. It's got three here. It's got kind of just a long reverb, the room reverb, and then one that I worked, quite a bit with, where I actually got it to have kind of a pre-delay on it. So it almost sounds like an echo. You can hear it here. You hear that? Okay, kind of like almost repeating the clap. That's it. Now, if I take it out, you might be able to notice it. See, it adds a little bit more character. Just a little added touch. Once again, the reverb here is very much adding to the stereo. I would heavily advise, if you're having stereo trouble, having issues with stereo, figure out ways to pan stuff. Again, the spreader is useful, but you do have to be careful with it because especially with melodic instruments, it can make it out of tune very fast, which might be what you're going for, so that's fine. I use the spreader a ton on melodic instruments. But a lot lighter than the drums. Yeah, also the other thing is like a slap delay, which is pretty much putting a delay on a track, turning the feedback down to like really, really short, or like no feedback at all, like pretty much only one repeat, and then like turning the delay to like 10 milliseconds. So you can there's pretty much not even a delay there, but what it can do is add a lot more stereo. So that's just another suggestion. I don't have anything here, I don't believe, to give an example of that, but I may in the future. Same goes for this one actually does not have any reverb on it at all. At least it doesn't have any, there's no reverb on that. That's just the sample. If you hear reverb, it's from the sample. Yeah, so that's pretty darn simple. But again, the thing that's giving it the stereo flavor here is the spreader. So once again, I'm still finding a way to get some stereo in there. Now, again, you don't you're not required to make every track stereo. In fact, a lot of times you absolutely do not want to do that. It really does depend on the situation. Just do what sounds good to you. Oftentimes, even a mono dead center thing is what you're going to want. It really, really does depend on the track. It really depends on what you're mixing with. Anything that I tell you here is more of a tip. It's a guideline. It's not a rule. Anything can change. Pretty much any rule can be broken. It's kind of the fun and the magic of mixing and recording, just music creating in general. So this one also has that room reverb, the same one that my low snare and, as I put it, my high snare, which is still pretty much a clap, both have. And without it, you see, it's a lot more stereo with it. So then this guy definitely has, now it sounds like it's got a lot more reverb, but it like a lot more technical reverb or whatever, but it's simply one reverb. Simple as that. It's just turned up pretty loud. That's it. There you go. Just mess with the reverb. If I do something on reverb, that's going to be another time. In this case, I'm just going to kind of show you that, reverb does stuff that can be very important to stereo mixes, to adding character, to adding flavor. So all of that said, there's your snares. The kick is a lot more simple here because I hardly ever layer the kick more than once. Or maybe twice, I mean. I've got my main kick here, right? That, without that kick, you lose all the oomph. That's the main kick. If you listen to this, right? Without it, it's just not even there anymore. Because the other thing adding to it, as I put here, is just my stereo kick. Basically, and again, you're definitely not always going to want this. It really does depend on the track. But in this situation, I wanted very much kind of a very powerful stereo type of kick. So I used two samples. And this one, I used the spreader and the room reverb to help me out here. But notice that with the stereo kick, that was, okay, so yeah, with the stereo kick, here's my main kick. I ever so slightly have, the sample already had enough bass in it. It's going to depend on the sample you're using, or, whatever synth drum you're creating or whatever. It's going to depend, but in this case, there was already quite a bit of low end, especially between, like 50 and 100. I didn't really need to mess with that all that much. Now, I will add in, and you'll see it even on the master. This is my master track EQ, which is barely there, but it's still there. With the master track EQ, I always completely get rid of the low end, pretty much anywhere 30 hertz under, and anywhere, 18,000 to 20,000 or higher. I pretty much completely get rid of those frequencies. The only speakers that ever can pick that up are like special DJ speakers. In most regards, you don't want those there. They can actually mess with the mix and distort things. And you really can't hear it on most speakers. So that said, I slightly have isolated the very, very low end here, and then I completely did here. And then, like I was saying, as you can see here, I've actually taken out quite a bit of the low end so that this is not competing with this. This is is a bit higher end. Now, of course, I did take out the very, very, very high end stuff, but in the midtones and stuff, the stereo kick is emphasizing more on the higher part, whereas I took out the higher frequencies of the main kick, so they both kind of pop out a bit. So then this is just the stereo kick. You can still hear the bass, but it's not super strong. The other thing is that I didn't go super exaggerative on it because the kick usually should not go too far out of the beat. But in this regard, because I wanted the stereo kick to pop out, I actually put a delay on it of minus 10 ticks which is, as it says right there, minus 4.5 milliseconds behind the main kick. And as you can see here, I did not, in a lot of these, I actually don't have the, I believe I did. I actually played all of these parts on my keyboard and then would quantize it. But a lot of the time, like I said, you never want anything perfect. Lots of times I will actually imperfect a quantize. So it's not perfectly at 100. It's not a very hard, it's still pretty close to perfectly played, but I did put it at 90 rather than 100, so it isn't absolutely perfect. Adds just a little bit. It's never really noticeable, but it does add, and people would very slightly notice the difference. So then, all that said, the other thing, the other thing is, once again, compressor. It helps a ton. You need the compressor for super aggressive tracks. In this regard, again, they have fantastic presets. There's one for Type R kick drum. It's been there a while. They call it Type R. It's a Studio VCA compressor. I believe it was the threshold was a little bit lighter than this. I pulled it back, turned up the ratio because I want it really, really powerful. You got your auto gain at 0 decibels. Your makeup is at 3 decibels. So it's really, really powerful. So you can see, and you can ever so slightly hear this coming before the main kick. It's just a bit so that it pops out. Without it, see, there's pretty much very little stereo, and it's not as bright, and it's not piercing as much. See, it just gives it a lot more power having that extra kick. Again, you're not always going to want that. Heck no. But in this regard, in this situation, yes. That same compressor situation was applied to this, though just ever so slightly softer, if you can see here. That's just personal preference. And then the other thing, and this isn't always done either. Again, I know I've said it a billion times, but it really does depend on your mix. Sidechain. This thing does not actually make noise. See that? It's not making any noise. Well, it's not muted either. What the heck? So what's going on here is, I'm sure many of you are aware, sidechaining compression is pretty much having specific specific tracks sidechained to a track. Like in this regard, with the compression of another track is assigned to pretty much compress, let's just say turn down the volume on itself every time the sidechain track makes noise. That's probably a really unprofessional and stupid way to explain it, but there you go. So in this regard, I just pretty much bounced this as an audio track and then put it in. And then what I did was I turned out, there's no output. So it could be on stereo output. It could make noise, but it's not. I turned off the output. So then what that does though is it's still detected as, as noise. So when I believe the electric piano here has it, you will hear that there's a little bit of it's sidechain compressed. This is very, very useful to have instruments assigned to sidechain compression to the kick, because it pretty much automatically turns down all of the tracks, even if it's just a little bit, to let the kick come in and have its very, very quick moment. Not always needed, for sure. But in this regard, especially with how electronic this track kind of is, I wanted sidechain compression. So yeah, it's very, very, very light. but it's still there. You probably, now listen without the kick. You hear it, it's going down a little bit. If we look at, I've got two compressors on it. I believe this is not it. That's the thing that's just compressing entirely just the electric piano. Okay, here we go. This is my sidechain compression for the electric piano. And you'll see this thing pull back every single time this waveform goes off. So look. And it's only when this goes off. Now I'm sure a bunch of you already know about this, but I thought I would add it in. Having that is very useful on many occasions to help pop out the kick. So yeah, all of that said, that's pretty much it. You've got your hats here, which are all again, I've layered the hats. I don't really do, in fact, with the hats, in these cases, they've got a little bit of compression, but this one doesn't even have a compressor. So this one is kind of, and you hear it's got that same kind of pre-delayed space design, the reverb on it. In this case, I didn't want the reverb coming to the center, which I could have it do, but instead just post pan. So pretty much I have this panned a little bit more to the left, so the reverb is in the left. This one is panned more to the right. So you've got, right? They're not playing the same thing. One even sounds different. They're both in different ears. And then this one is slightly to the left as well, and this is I believe this is my fake shaker, right? And they've all got that same reverb on them, right? So it just adds a little bit. I very, very often will layer hats and have a couple different things going. Again, you can see here I have put some, I guess you could say pre-delay or something on one of the hats so that it's about 4.5 milliseconds before the other two. And then you can see here that this one is, while almost perfect, technically at 95%, not a full 100%. So it is a very, very slight little bit imperfect. So yeah, that's about it. The other thing I would advise, before I get into the last thing here about the drums is, especially when you're getting into a big section, what I often like to do, you'll see it here, actually with this one, I have two, cause I'm weird. I stacked the cymbals twice here. Right, so this is that's my main cymbal, but I have an extra stack here because this one wasn't getting loud enough. I probably could have put compression on it, but I guess I was a terrible person. But yeah, you can pretty much, I just added on an extra little bit, and then to add on to that, turned it up specifically for the first time it hits on the big chorus. If you're going into something that is big, that needs to have a lot of power, often turning up the cymbals just for that moment it actually helps a ton. So in this regard, just adds a little bit, makes a transition from something that's kind of building up to be very, very, powerful once it gets there. But then see, for the rest of these, its original state, volume state, if you will. So it does, again, turn up again here because this is building up. And then once more, just kidding, not really. I thought I did, but just kidding, I guess I didn't. Ha. So yeah, that's a little add-in thing that I just thought I'd let you guys know. So lastly, before I end this, stereo kick and kick have to work with the bass here. Let's just say the kick. Let's just be simple. the kick has to work with the bass. The bass and the kick are pretty much married people. You cannot, and this also goes for how the bass is played. The bass has to play in a way that the kick is going to agree with. It doesn't mean they have to play the same thing, but they have to sound good together. A lot of times people have almost gotten frustrated, like, why doesn't this sound like it's fitting together? Why does the bass blah, blah, blah? Because usually, in most regards, the bass and the kick need to be working together somehow. You need to figure out how they need to work together. And especially if you're a one-man band here, you do need to know that stuff. I'm not going to be a teacher for bassists. I'm not technically a bassist. I am a drummer. But that's just kind of that's kind of how it is. The bass and the kick are kind of married to each other. So here's my bass here, right? And pretty much my bass has most of, especially because there was already enough low end in the kick, I've got most of the subs, the very low end stuff going on all the way up to, oh heck, it looks like it might even be 40 hertz or so. So yeah, I've got it peaking pretty much there. And then I also, because the bass does hit a couple higher notes, especially at the beginning of this verse, which I will go ahead and play. I did turn up a little bit of the higher end, but that barely pops up when it's playing the lower notes, at least not as much. Right? So it's kind of hitting this area right here. You're obviously getting, see, there it goes, right? It helps it pop out in that regard. So now you've got a muffled kick with a filter on it, right? And the other thing here, number one, the stereo kick is helping a lot because the stereo kick helps bring out the brightness of the kick. Usually I will have the kick not as low of a frequency as the bass. You never want both the kick and the bass playing, peaking at the same frequencies. That they'll fight with each other, things will get muddy. You don't want that. In this regard, they both are kind of emphasizing on fairly similar frequencies. Probably, they are playing in some of the same frequencies, but the bass is definitely hitting more of a sub-level than the kick is. The bass, now, again, listen. The bass is pretty much playing along with the kick here. See, they're pretty much working together in most situations here. So, all of that said, usually I will turn up the highs, like the mid-tones or something, in the kick a little bit. In this regard, it pretty much was all put on the stereo kick to do that. The main kick kind of just drives the whole thing. But it's not what's piercing through the mix. At least not on its own. So with both of those, with both of these kicks kind of pretty much piercing through they're pretty much giving the bass punch. The bass is now pretty much punching, right? Without the kick, it's very soft, right? You get in the kick and suddenly it's like a punch, And once again, that's me kind of showing how the bass and the kick go together extremely well. They're meant for each other. And that's pretty much that. Any extra stuff is like, putting a little bit of stereo on this by putting a very slight chorus on the bass, other stuff. But just wanted to give you that advice. I know this is kind of long. I'll be editing it a little bit, but that's pretty much that. That is how this. That's at least one track to show some advice I would have for mixing the drums and having the drums work with the rest of the track. Now, again, If they sound squashed because let's assume that you're mixing around a limiter, turn it down. If the drum, oftentimes turning it down will actually help things pop out more because the compressor on the actual tracks is now agreeing with the compressor on the master track. If it's too quiet though, then my next suggestion would be to tone down the entire mix just a little bit. Or maybe turn it all up a little. I don't know. That all depends on your levels of everything and how it's all sounding. Hopefully this was helpful. There isn't much I can say here. Just be really, it takes practice, takes time, figuring stuff out, but just, mess with the EQ, mess with the compressor. Those two are going to be your best friends with drums. For me, probably especially the compressor. But both are just about nearly equally as important. So yeah, there you go. That's that. Hope this helped, and I'm sorry this was long, but hopefully if you were interested enough in how my stuff sounds, then this helped you out. Thank you. Bye-bye.